It is a pleasure to welcome Marni Battista to the show today. And just as I found out, beautiful Steamboat, Colorado, which I love that place. One of my favorite places to ski. So, but we're not here to talk about skiing.
It's another episode.
That's a different show altogether. But Marni, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I will say that skiing is snow mountain sports is the one sport that my husband and I can happily do together because he's not better at it than me. So finding some
There's no competition going
yeah,
on in your world
yeah,
in
so
marriage.
finding
Okay.
a sport that we can enjoy together was life-changing.
I
Just
thought
say
you were
that.
going to say because you don't always have to ride the lift together. You can ski at your own run if you want to, and then meet up at the lodge and
No,
have a.
it's like something we enjoyed. We actually had our Valentine's Day date. There's a one lift that's a double. It's an old one and they call
Mhm.
it the love chair. And so we went out on Valentine's Day and we took the bar Yui up and it was really cute. So anyway, find a
That's fun.
sport you could do with your husband. It definitely adds to the romance.
That's great to have good start. So, but one of the things that I'm curious about is the history you had. You started in this largely in the world of dating, but then it's transitioned into more the world of living within a relationship. And you've got the book out, The Radical Living. And I want to just take a couple of snippets from there that that are just the idea of how do I live well within a relationship when a lot of times it seems like it just complicates things or I don't live as well in a relationship. And so what do you see and where do you want to go with this?
Yeah, so about 3 or 4 years ago, I took a essay class. I wanted to get in modern love in the New York Times, and so I wrote this article. And what it was about was how I blamed my husband for everything that wasn't working in my life, and I had all the evidence, right? Like,
Hmm.
he was a great dad, and then my kids grew up, and then he just wasn't working, and he was never happy in where we were living, um, and that article sort of was like, as one does when someone's writing something that ends up in the LA Times, like there's some personal reflection. And that really started this idea of confronting, like, I felt like our life and our marriage was like the game of Jenga. Like if you
Yep.
pull out one piece, the whole thing is going to kind of fall down. So I was just sort of like, I'm going to kind of ignore that problem and we're just going to carry on living. But I was blaming him for like everything. Ultimately, what I realized was I was mad at him because he was asking me to confront this idea of change. And we'd been together for a really long time. I lived in my town of LA for like 25 years. Like, I just was afraid to change.
Hmm.
And I ended up getting in a ski accident actually in 2020. And I couldn't move for like 9 weeks. And I was kind of reevaluating my whole life. And that's when I decided I needed to start asking some better questions, rather than, why are you doing this to me? And why, why, are you, why are you making life so hard? And that journey, we got on the same page about what would it look like to create, a life of joy, meaning, and fulfillment. And so one of the first things we did was separately, we went through the last few years of our lives and we asked each other, what were your peak experiences? And we wrote them all down separately. And then we came back together. And this is a process I teach in my book. And we shared it. And you know what? It was a lot of the same stuff. And that's when we said, why are we not making our peak experiences our everyday life? And I realized because I was afraid of change. And then that's when I really started doing the inner work that changed our entire relationship.
So what it can I've got my curiosity is piqued with this, Marnie, of you here you are a woman that had a lot of structure and comfort and a lot of that structure probably and consistency, the comfort zone world that we all every single one of us has, even those that you look at in my experience that are way out there, they still have a comfort zone in which they reside.
Yes.
But what when you talk about okay, that all of a sudden gets opened up in your eyes of wait, I don't like change. I don't I actually run from it maybe and I dig my heels in too much and now it's disrupting a lot. So what was it when you looked inward that actually helped cue into okay, I need to figure out how to embrace this or confront this?
Yeah, so one of the things I teach in the book is asking better questions. I call the wisdom seeking questions. And so I asked myself, and this is a really hard question. I didn't want it. I didn't like it, which was why do I keep creating this in my life over and over again, which was being dissatisfied with everything, whatever I created. And what I realized was that I had come to this place inside of me where I thought that what was making me happy was the performance, so to speak, of the expectations I had of all the external things in my life. My business reaching a certain number, my husband doing a certain set of things, like looking a certain, like, the external. What I realized was that I had spent my whole sort of experience with my husband working really hard to get there and believing that if we did change anything, then my sense of strength, identity, power, control, like all those things would vanish. And then who would I be? And
Hmm.
so, what I really had to do was start focusing on how do I create a sense of safety and home internally. And you know what I discovered was there were so many things that I was avoiding, that I was people pleasing,
Hmm.
and a lot of other things that were buried underneath that behavior.
Yeah, and so you're describing that you all of a sudden found those patterns, like that word you just used, that we all have them, and then you start to recognize. And that's what's so interesting in my experience, personally and professionally, is when I can see it, now I can start to change it. But we spend so
Yeah.
much time in life never even taking the time to try to see it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't want to say, I was like, why, just, happy wife, happy life. Don't you know that's the rule? Just follow it. And so, but here's what's crazy is I didn't even know I was doing this. My husband is British. We're different in a lot of different ways, and he came from like an interesting background and had a lot of challenges. And I just always sort of was kind of like doing what I could to placate him and try and make him happy
Hmm.
without even realizing that I was doing that. Because again, I didn't feel enough comfort, confidence, strength inside of me. And so when we hit the road and we decided to sell most everything and live in an RV for a year, and I started to build this sense of home inside of myself. And I realized that I could do change. I started to set boundaries in a different way, not from the ultimatum, don't do this, da da da,
Hmm.
but like a very different energy and a very different ask. And ultimately, it felt really good to say, like, here's the things I will accept, here's the things I won't. Because the one thing you taught me is I can survive change. So I know that I'm committed to this. I'm committed to
Hmm.
my own happiness, my own fulfillment. And when that dynamic changed, it was great because we both up leveled.
Yeah, because then you're describing it's no longer trying to accommodate and adjust to each other as much as it is spurring each other on because you know you're each capable.
Yeah, yeah, and so it was an amazing, amazing adventure in discovering the next level of what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship, and then also create a shared mutual dream.
Yeah, and that's where you start getting to the I use the phraseology of collaborative alliances, where it's goals that you agree on, and you both have to play your part. You have to collaborate to make it happen. And far too often, we really stink at collaborating because I'm too attached to something or I'm too afraid of something.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that I talk about a lot about reinventing, and I think what happens is I was married the first time for 17 years, and there was no reinventing after 17 years. After the shine wore off, it was just like, and I'm
Hmm.
really committed to this relationship. I have 3 kids and they love their stepdad, and they've been, he's been their dad for a really long time. And I think that was and my parents passed away. And so I didn't really have any model. They were married for like 43 years, but I didn't really have any models of like, what do you do like as you evolve through the phases of life together? And
Hmm.
that you have to give each other the space to change. So if you're constantly pushing change, if you're pushing it away, if you're constantly trying to go back to what it was, like you're just in like fight or flight mode and you can't evolve into something better, even though that's what everybody wants.
So let's pivot it then to when you're talking about other people doing this because
Yeah.
that's your work is
Yep.
trying to help other people recognize their own authenticity, if you will, their own strength and solidness, and then do that alongside somebody. So, what are some of the key components that make that work as far as you see?
I love this question. I really, in my book, I teach this design thinking model for humans. It's from Stanford University, is how products are designed, right? So you walk through this process of really designing your ideal life. So when I do it with clients, they're like, how do I get my partner on board? Like, he's not into this stuff, you know? And so, one of the first things that we have to realize is you're going to do the process a way that works for you. He is going, or she is going to do it in a way that is different. And that's okay because everybody comes to awareness in their own way.
Hmm.
One person's detail oriented, one person's not. One time spends 27 minutes on one question, one's like 30 seconds, right? So suspending judgment of how the other person arrives at their awarenesses is like most important step. Um, and then doing the pieces separately and creating space for that, and then coming back together and having those conversations and not taking someone's dissatisfaction personally.
That's a tough one, particularly if you're coming from a standpoint of, wait a second, my identity is largely tied to your well being.
Yes. Um, and and it was very much like we had this discussion before we started. We put it on like a big post-it note, and it said like, "For the sake of," and we answered the question, "What for the sake of what are we doing this?" You know, and we both had those like mutual agreements. It was for us, it was for our kids, it was for our shared common values that we did sign up to, 16 years ago. And so it was really great because when we discussed like what's working and what's not working in the different parts of our life, and we had that like for the sake of sort of as the underlying foundation, and not taking it personally and saying, okay, we're doing this because we want to create something, or both wanting something different in the next chapter. It was, and then practicing a lot of good conversation skills and taking a break if we need to, and sharing feelings and repair conversations. It wasn't, you can't rush the process, right? So, but I will say that once we started doing it and we did our first, I call them experiments, like our first prototype of like, we both had these ideas and we're like, well, I said, it'd be really crazy. I was like, I don't know, why don't we rent a Sprinter van for like 2 weeks and see if we can live together in it? And he was like, well, that sounds fun.
Right.
Right? And then we did it, and then so now he's into it, right? And so after the last day, we were in Utah, and we sat down for dinner, and I got out my little notebook, and we had these experiment questions. What are we answering?
Hmm.
And we were both so excited about it because now we're like designing something together,
Hmm.
right? And it's unknown and no one's better at it than the other. And we are like, oh my God, this is so cool. Okay, what if we did it again and we kind of solved for these challenges that came up? And that was really the process that ended up in us deciding to sell the house and live in an RV for a year, right? So we
Okay.
and it was so fun to come up with that because we couldn't have thunk it like, well, the way we solve this problem is go on a challenge
Yeah.
together. No.
And you're talking about, well, if you go something too huge too quick, it's paralyzing almost, because it's like one of you would likely dig in of like, no, I can't quite capture that idea.
Yeah. And so by the time we did the last like 6 week experiment, we rented like a 35-foot, and my husband was like chomping at the bit to like get those realtors in there. And I was
Yep.
like, honestly, pull the trigger, And then we were like, okay, cool. Now we're going to design this year together. And so it really took us from like being on separate pages to on the same page.
Hmm.
And the process of learning how to create something together and collaborate and go through slowly and not judge, take things personally and not judge someone else's process. That really was a great foundation. And so I have watched lots of couples do this very
Hmm.
differently as individuals, but come together because the outcome is something that they're both committed to.
Yeah, what's standing out to me in this, Marnie, is the idea of this is creating a better story of your life and your relationship, kind of simultaneously
Yes.
alongside each other, because that's where, I mean, I've said this phrase a couple different times throughout the years of Sexy Mirrors Radio, that the biggest desire killer in marriage is the inordinate amount of meaningless time we spend together. Because we do, you
Interesting.
get
Yeah.
caught in a routine
Yeah.
of just every night is dinner, TV, maybe a surface conversation, maybe surfing on your phones beside each other, and then you go to bed and you wonder where is the passion? Where is the desire? Where is the energy? And a lot of it is because I stopped living a really good story, not just our marriage. I did. And so you're describing how do you put some frameworks together to create a better story and then have your marriage be part of that. So that way it's something bigger than us. Cause I think every single one of us gets more energized when it's something beyond us.
Yes, absolutely. And when we did that experiment, and that's what you're really thinking about your life now as a series of experiments together, and that's super fun. And so we both decided we were like kind of curious. We were getting into country music. We went to this music festival, and we were listening to music, like making out like teenagers, jumping into a foam pit, like dancing to EDM. And I was like, oh my God, I feel like alive again,
Hmm.
And it's not, believe me, like every day was like that, but we were like, wow, like this is we forgot how to have fun. And I think
Yeah.
whether you're going to go do something like big like that, or you're just looking at how can I start to design my life with some more amplification of the things that I love that I'm missing, you start to realize that fun and play are on the bottom of the relationship to-do list. And that's why I was talking about skiing at the beginning is like my husband and I didn't ski together. He likes surfing, I don't. Like he's athletic, I'm not. This process was like, wait, we like to hike. I am more capable. It's like, so it really recreated a whole nother foundation for us to move forward and to start having fun and actually, having a live. I'm into sourdough right now. You got to feed the starter. You can't leave it in the fridge, for like 2 months. It's going to die, The
Okay.
bubbles come out, it won't grow. And so you got to feed the starter.
That's a great phrase. I'm not familiar with sourdough to that level. I'm just rolling along, nodding my head with
The
you here,
people who
Marty.
do are like, "Girl, I totally
Absolutely.
get you."
Yeah. Well, that's really good because I think this is something that sets the stage for a lot of people, regardless of where we are in the status of our relationship. There's an element of recognizing when I can turn inward, like you're describing, when I can challenge myself, I can set a whole different path on where things could go and what we're capable of. And for sure what I'm capable of then.
Absolutely. This is very trite, but it bears repeating. You can argue for your limitations or you can argue for your possibilities, right? And I think when you get into a relationship, the need to be right is very strong. And then we get into these cycles of arguing for our limitations and your limitations. And so what I liked about it is I'm very like linear, structural. I'm like, give me a process and a framework and like let's do it together, and you can do it your own way, and let's see what we create. Changed everything. It just
Yeah.
really did. So I highly advocate this as a we project.
Absolutely, but it also, like you just started the whole conversation as we're winding this down. It starts with a me
A
that then
hundred
turns into a
percent
we, right? And that's the message we have all the way through with Sexy Marriage Radio is I got to take on myself first because no matter how long I try taking on my wife, it just doesn't gain ground.
No, it really doesn't. And I think like also it's so healing to be able to say, and my husband, bless his soul, like the box of books came. And he's like, it's here. He goes, and I'm in it. But I took responsibility for my part
Hmm.
and this process allowed him to take responsibility for his part.
Hmm.
And I think that's also a really important part, right, of this relationship versus
Yeah.
going to therapy and being like, okay, therapist, which I love therapy, by the way, but the habit of like, okay, you tell him what a jerk he is, or you tell her, and so it just flipped the paradigm of
Yeah.
each taking responsibility and then creating something new together.
Yeah. Well, speaking as one that is a therapist, that's horrible therapy if that's what a therapist is
Exactly.
doing.
It is, right? No, it is. And that's why, and I just think that I'm so glad that you're doing this work because that is not helpful. And so if
No.
someone's like, that's what it's feeling like, or if you were like, oh, that is what we do in therapy, you have a great therapist right here. Go do it his way. and then
Well,
do this
Marnie,
book together.
yeah, perfect. Absolutely. And that tees it up perfectly. So how can people find you and the book?
Yeah, so it's radicallivingchallenge.com. And on that page, you can find out all about the book and about me and all the different various places you can buy it online. And also go to your local bookstore and ask them for it too.
Perfect. Well, Marnie, thank you so much for the work and the energy in which you're bringing it. So it's been so much fun today. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.